So why are so many young Americans not having any more children? Well, if you look at the surrounding conditions in America and you see how staggering the cost of living is in this country, it begins to make sense why so many people are foregoing having a family. Now, if we just look at one example on, for instance, the cost of groceries, okay? It is insanely expensive to even put food on the dinner table, let alone even getting gas these days is crazy expensive, to fund your own transportation. The cost of living is through the roof in America. People are just getting by, living paycheck to paycheck, especially young Americans. Young people in this country are struggling. So imagine, just having to deal with the day-to-day cost of living and then having to bring another child into this world, which is way more burdensome when you do that. If people are living paycheck to paycheck and, people are just drowning in credit card debt, groceries, transportation costs, it's easy why so many people are foregoing having children in this country. You really have to look at the real root cause of why so many people are not just having kids. Young people are struggling to stay above water, to make it day to day. And honestly, I'm in the fortunate situation of not having debt. And thankfully my wife is in a good career. She's progressing very well. But we're expecting our first child too. But I can understand why so many people are just not having kids anymore. We notice, especially with the cost of healthcare in this country, that you can easily go underwater having a child. And if you're not prepared, that's just going to set you way back. And that's just not going to be ideal for any child that you bring into this world. It's a very unfortunate era that we live in America, where we are forced to choose with having to look out for our needs, to live day by day, paycheck to paycheck, and miss out on what I think is perhaps the most important mission in humanity, which is to procreate and to be multiplied, to be fruitful. And it's very sad that we live in an era where, so many Americans cannot have any kids because of how dire the economic situation is in this country. It's very sad. And, if you couple the cost of actually raising a child, on average, you need to have at least $500,000 set aside from age 0 to 18 for one child. That's just one. Okay. Additionally, another challenge is, having the time set aside to bond with that child. Most people work full-time jobs at the least just to get by in this country, at least 40 hours. Most people are working 50, 60, 70 hours just to get by, So when you have a child, one of you have to be prepared to take time off to care for that infant. And if you're in the fortunate situation that you live close to family, or your parents can help you look after the child, then great, that's a wonderful situation. But a lot of people out there don't have family that they can rely on. And oftentimes you have, the two parents that are working full-time, working overworked hours. And if one of them have to cut their hours to care for the child, then that's a challenge. That's a real challenge, for the family, especially if you depend on that income for raising a child. And then the alternative is if you both have to work full time and you have to rely on daycare, then the cost of daycare is like a mortgage in itself. So it's very quick to realize and understand how burdensome the cost is in affording a child in America. This is why so many young people are foregoing having children. And it's a real crisis, honestly. I think that we're not doing enough as a country, and I'm talking to, officials in government, in the state, local, national level, that this needs to be addressed in this country. There's not enough resources for young people today to start families, and it really needs to be addressed. Yeah, it's just the cost of living is out of control. People can barely make their rent. We're drowning in credit card debt. We're drowning in, useless loans. Some people that are not financially disciplined, then you're setting yourself up for failure doing that. But, there's some things that we also can't control, and that's the cost of, inflation. If you're a renter, you're at the mercy of, your landlord. These everyday costs are the things that are kind of putting a burden on the average American family that are looking to have children. And that's, putting a huge strain on their ability to have children. We live in a cost of living crisis in America. And that's why so many people are not having children. It's a sad situation. But anyways, that's my rant for today on why so many people are not having children. They're foregoing starting a family. And yeah, I'd love to know in the comments below, what you think is causing so many young people not having kids anymore. Is there something that I've kind of missed, or did I pretty much hit the nail on the head? Anyways, if you like my content, feel free to give me a like and a thumbs up, and subscribe for future videos. Take care, guys.